We've had the weekend now to learn a lot more about the new Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. And it is not an exaggeration to say that this is the most radical and ideologically extreme Speaker of the House in modern political history. You know, it's hard to go and say, in the history of the United States, Mike Johnson may well be the most extreme Speaker of the House in the history of the country. But when we talk about the full history of the country, norms and context, everything has changed. It's less easy to make such an apples to apples comparison. Certainly in my lifetime, this is the most extreme and radical Speaker of the House we have ever had. We knew that Mike Johnson was a MAGA extremist. We knew that he played up the, Joe Biden didn't really win in 2020 stuff, but it turns out that that is just a sliver of the totality of Mike Johnson's extremism. And part of what happened over the last week is that Johnson's rise to power was so quick. Nobody was talking about this guy as a serious candidate. Next thing you know, he's Speaker of the House. We only now have had the opportunity to do a deep dive into his career and his positions. It's been done, and it is utterly horrifying. Let's go through some of it with video. Johnson is a 2020 election denier. We knew that. Close ties to Trump, truly MAGA's MAGA, I guess we could say. But on every issue, he's a radical. He called wind and solar power the most inefficient energy sources we have. He said living near wind turbines can cause depression and cognitive dysfunction. Maybe that explains why Trump's mush-mouthed these days. Maybe he's living near a wind turbine. In 2016, Johnson gave a sermon where he said that mass shootings are caused by teaching evolution in schools. Like this is not just I'd like lower taxes than you would. This is very serious stuff. On cannabis, I mean, obviously he opposed the expansion of medical marijuana in Louisiana, the state he's from. Johnson also joined the Republican State Attorney General Jeff Landry and Christian evangelist Kirk Cameron, the TV guy, to argue under the First Amendment for student-led prayer and religion in schools. Of course, that's the opposite of what the Constitution actually calls for. Johnson co-sponsored federal legislation which would ban abortions once a fetal heartbeat is detected. That's usually around 6 weeks into a pregnancy. No exceptions for any kind of illness, just period. That's it. Fetal heartbeat, no abortion would be one of the most extreme abortion standards, I guess we would call it, in the country. He once wrote that homosexuality will lead to, quote, chaos and sexual anarchy, and described it as, quote, inherently unnatural and a dangerous lifestyle. He also wanted to criminalize gay sex. He wrote in favor of criminalization of gay sex. This is the epitome of the Christian nationalist. Now, he also seems like one of these, I hate to use this word because the word is so morally loaded, but I was going to say a pervert, but I don't even know that I want to go in that direction. He's just one of these really strange guys. He was talking about his wife being worn out from being on her knees last week. He married his wife in what's called a covenant marriage. Now, if regular marriage isn't enough for you, you can avail yourself of something called covenant marriage. Covenant marriage is like it's like a hardcore marriage. Only a few states have it. In Louisiana, they have it. And if you, as part of a couple, choose to enter into a covenant marriage, these people are so insane. You agree to undergo premarital counseling. Before you can even consider getting a divorce, you have to get marital counseling if there's trouble during the marriage. You are limited in the reasons for which you're allowed to get a divorce. Now, Mike Johnson also has bemoaned and decried no-fault divorce. No-fault divorce just means if I don't want to be married anymore, I can choose not to be married anymore. I don't have to prove to anyone and give anyone an approved reason for wanting a divorce. Mike Johnson is against that. And he personally is in a covenant marriage where there's all these requirements. You're required to live apart for a bunch of time before you can get a divorce. It's bonkers stuff. He also, by the way, has said that democracy is not so good. What we need is biblical law, the epitome of tromping all over separation of church and state and Christian nationalism. Here is Mike Johnson from a few years ago.
We don't live in a democracy because a democracy is two wolves and a lamb deciding what's for dinner, okay? It's not just majority rule, it's a constitutional republic. And the founders set that up because they followed the biblical admonition on what a civil society is supposed to look like. We don't live in a democracy.
There you go. Listen, democracy, forget about that. That's what the Speaker of the House, who believed that Trump actually won the 2020 election, believes about democracy. He also has blamed the problems in the country, including mass shootings, on things like no-fault divorce. Here is a speech he gave, at one of these crazy right-wing events. I think this is one of the right-wing events where evangelicals pretend to like Jews in reality because they think that supporting Israel will bring about the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is bonkers, apocalyptic rapture stuff. Here is Mike Johnson. This is now the Speaker of the House. Dangerous radical.
Now, some of y'all were around in the late 60s. You remember that, what that was about. The countercultural revolution, Woodstock and drugs and peace and free love and all that, but more about the undermining of the foundations of religion and morality. Because if you remember, in the late 60s, we invented things like no-fault divorce laws. We invented the sexual revolution. We invented radical feminism. We invented legalized abortion in 1973.
It was invented.
But the state, the government, sanctions the killing of the unborn. All these things happened because as collectively as Americans, we began to get together in growing numbers and thumb our nose at the Creator and say, we don't believe that anymore. We're rejecting the founders' natural law philosophy in favor of moral relativism, and we are going down another path.
This is a full-on extremist. This is now the most powerful member of the House of Representatives.
Now, what we tolerate in moderation, our children excuse in excess. What happens when you fast forward another 30 or 40 years? Well, here's a picture's worth 1,000 words. Go to the next one for me. We know that we're living in a completely amoral society. And so people say, how can a young person go into their schoolhouse and open fire on their classmates? Because we've taught a whole generation, a couple of generations now of Americans, that there is no right and wrong, that it's about survival of the fittest, and you evolved from the primordial slime. Why is that life of any sacred value? Because
slime sounds about right when thinking about this guy. So, why is having an extremist as Speaker of the House so dangerous? This is the critical part, so that once you understand it, you can decide, I want to vote in 2024, or I don't care about this, I don't want to vote. The Speaker of the House is second in the line of succession to be President of the United States. You've got the Vice President and then the Speaker of the House. This extremist lunatic ideologue is now after the Vice President in the line of succession to be President of the United States. If that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. More practically, the Speaker of the House sets the legislative agenda in the House of Representatives, decides which bills come to the floor. An extremist speaker can prioritize harmful, divisive legislation, potentially leading to the enactment of policies that undermine democracy, which Mike Johnson would clearly like to do, and can simply keep off the floor sensible and important legislation. The Speaker of the House plays a major role in determining committee assignments. And what they can do is they can take over every committee on education, committee on whatever area you care about. The committee can be taken over by the extremist brown-nosers who suck up to Mike Johnson. They take over the committees. An extremist speaker can directly oppose a president's agenda if they're from a different party, or they can support it if they're from the same party. And so now Mike Johnson can oppose everything Joe Biden wants to do. And if Trump becomes president in 24 and Republicans keep the House and Mike Johnson stays as speaker, can rubber stamp everything that Trump wants to do. That's insane. And also, the Speaker of the House influences the rules of the House themselves. And as we know, the more extreme Republicans love to change the rules in the House for their perceived benefit. Sometimes it backfires, sometimes it doesn't, but it's for their perceived benefit. So this is truly a disaster. And when I talk about Christian nationalists getting into positions of power, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's in the House. Next thing you know, she could be in a position of power. This is the sort of thing we're talking about. Mike Johnson embodies exactly that. So it's another reason to say we have to vote a year from now. It's basically a year, almost to the day from now, November of 2024. If Democrats take the House, this guy is done. Even if Democrats don't take the House, but are able to prevent DeSantis or Trump or Nikki Haley or whoever from becoming president, then at least there will be no insane Oval Office agenda for Mike Johnson's House of Representatives to rubber stamp and to pass. So whatever we think is the most likely outcome in 2024, we must vote to make it the least bad outcome possible. This is the worst of modern MAGA. And as Matt Gaetz said last week, the guy is right. He's wrong about a lot of things, but he's right about this. MAGA is still in control. And when you see MAGA kick out Kevin McCarthy, by the way, not a moderate guy, just not insane enough to be MAGA. They kick out Kevin McCarthy and they put in Mike Johnson. You realize that MAGA is still in control, and it is an extremely scary thing. So much of the news that we read every day is driven by clickbait headlines, even from reputable sources, and we'll end up stuck in these echo chamber algorithms, and it's not a good thing at all. Our sponsor, Ground News, will pull you out of that situation. Ground News will give you a summary of every breaking news story. It'll show you how the left is covering it, how the right is covering it, how the center is covering it, assuming that they are covering it. If not, it'll tell you that. And then you can make your own mind up. For example, Ground News is showing me here how right-wing news outlets have concocted this narrative that George Soros is some kind of Hamas apologist. Of course, only right-wing news websites are pushing the story, and Ground News shows you who owns the news outlets. The New York Post is owned by the Murdochs. The Millennial Post is run by Matthew Aziali. They even have a feature called My News Bias, which is basically a dashboard for your specific news diet. Shows you what you're reading, how reliable it is, whether you have blind spots you should be aware of. It's only available through the Ground News Vantage plan. You can get it for 30% off. That makes it about $5 a month when you go to ground.news/Pacman. The link is right down below.